Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the United Nations Foundation? What is the UN Foundation doing to inform the public, the media, and policymakers, both in the United States and around the world, about various UN programs to combat illiteracy and poverty? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're looking at the United Nations Foundation, an organization that's been working to help inform people in the United States and around the world about the myriad of United Nations programs. My guest today is an expert on the foundation. My guest today is Minh-Thu Pham. Minh-Thu Pham is the Director of Public Policy at the United Nations Foundation and Better World Campaign and is an expert on the UN Millennium Development Goals. She is the past policy advisor at the United Nations Executive Office of the Secretary General. Minh-Thu Pham, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Great, thank you, Bill. I'm very happy to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. Let's jump right into it and talk about the UN Foundation for just a couple of minutes. When was it formed? Why was it formed? And what does it do?
The UN Foundation was founded in the late 90s by Ted Turner. He saw that the U.S. had been about $1 billion in arrears to the UN. These are the dues that a country has to pay to be a member of the UN, and at the time he said, you know, great nations pay their dues, and so I will contribute $1 billion to the UN, which is what the U.S. owed at the time, and this was 15 years ago. This was a historic gift. No one up until that point had made a contribution to philanthropy and to global issues in that amount before, and it was really a historic moment. And of course, a private citizen can't pay a nation's dues, and so they decided to support UN causes and to help fund activities around the UN with this gift. And with that, then he founded the UN Foundation.
And of course, a lot of people have speculated over the years, I guess we would have to ask him or some of the other philanthropists, that he really laid down the marker for a lot of philanthropists to get involved. And we see that there have been more and more of them gotten involved over the years. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a major player with the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF with Rotary International to combat polio. Yeah. So there are a lot of players who are involved in this. A lot of people seem to think that maybe Ted Turner kind of laid it down at the beginning.
We like to think
15 years ago, but we can't prove that. So let's talk a little bit about the Millennium Development Goals. They were formed or adopted in 2000 by the majority of the countries of the United Nations General Assembly. There are 8 Millennium Development Goals. Give us a little overview of a couple of them and what has transpired over these last 13 years in dealing with them.
Yeah, great question. Well, the Millennium Development Goals, as you say, were a set of goals that the world agreed to try to address some of the major issues that we see in terms of poverty, children's education, and the things that sort of are the basis of what we think of should be a respectable life that people have, and leading people onto the path of livelihoods and progress in their countries. And so world leaders got together in 2000 and they agreed to the Millennium Declaration, which lays out a bold vision for humanity and the future. And so the Millennium Development Goals, which include goals such as cutting poverty in half within 15 years, and so the deadline is 2015, which is coming up very soon. Cutting child mortality by 2/3, dealing with the HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria epidemics, which have really greatly affected large parts of the world, including in sub-Saharan Africa, and addressing maternal mortality, women who die in childbirth. And so those are noble goals that I think everyone in the world saw were really important, and that not only policy leaders and our global leaders, but also your average person at home who is somewhat concerned about what's happening in the world and can say, Actually, that makes a lot of sense. My grandmother can understand it. My 13-year-old cousin can kind of say, actually, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We shouldn't have this level of poverty in the world where there is so much prosperity in certain places. And so the MDGs is really sort of a crowning achievement, I think, for the UN, where the world leaders could agree to a set of priorities and mobilize constituents and funding towards achieving them.
And of course, these goals to reduce poverty, to promote universal primary school education, to
Yep.
combat AIDS, to empower women, to promote sustainable development. These are goals we've been working on for years and years, but it seems like that by adopting these, the countries of the world and the United Nations have really focused attention on them so that we can sort of focus like a laser, as the old saying goes, to really not get sidetracked and to move away. I mean, not to say there are not other things going on, but
Yep.
to really keep the attention of the United Nations agencies, the governments, but even more importantly, maybe the non-governmental organizations who play a key role in this.
Right, right, absolutely. And even if world leaders agreed to the goals, actually what's made them so effective is that they were a mobilizing and galvanizing tool to get private sector, non-governmental organizations, civil society, foundations, and others involved to say, hey, actually, this is really focusing us and around something that we all agree on too, and it's not just governments. And in fact, the MDGs couldn't be achieved by governments alone. Official development assistance, what we call foreign aid, is very important, but also the role of the private sector in in bringing in what the ideas and technologies and commodities that they have, as well as just implementation by NGOs that do really great work on the ground. And so you need the world to kind of coalesce around these goals, and that's actually happened with this. And progress has been really great. I think in parts of the world we have more than halved poverty already, and we still have a couple of years left. We've made quite a bit of progress. In some areas, we still have a lot to do, especially in maternal and child health. But we're still making progress, and we have less than 1,000 days. We just reached or passed the 1,000-day mark to the end of the Millennium Development Goals, the target of 2015. But we've made a lot of progress, and the goals have helped to sort of steer more attention towards achieving them.
Now, it's been estimated there are over 2 billion people out of 7.2 billion right now on planet Earth who are living in abject poverty or living under $1.50 a day, something like that. But how do you take that message? You think about, we see slums around us so often, but let's think about an Andean village, a poor Andean village,
Yeah.
and people who really are just eking out of subsistence living in this environment. How do you convey that message to people in the United States or Europe or Asia, wherever it might be, that's important not only to deal with problems in your own country, but to think about these Andean villagers who really do not have a bright future if they're just constantly struggling every day just to stay alive, just to provide the basic necessities of a little bit of food, a little bit of water, and probably no health care. But how do you get that message across and to make people, we who are sitting here watching TV in the
Yeah.
evening, really realize it's important to be involved
Yeah.
in helping to overcome these to achieve the Millennium Development Goals?
Yeah, in fact, I actually think that if you talk to people about it, they understand that already inherently. People have core human values where they don't want their fellow human being to be living in abject poverty. And so I think if you talk to people, they really do understand that necessity. Whether they have as much knowledge about it as some people who work day in and day out in this field, maybe not. But if you ask them, they actually do really care about these things. They do care about their fellow human being. And so I think it's really just bringing to light the situation that people are in. The UN was founded on basic human values of equality and freedom and basic prosperity for all. And so I think that is a value that everybody has. And I think our challenge is to really communicate those problems that are out there and then what people can do about them. And also globally, what we as a global community, countries have come together to agree on to do about that. So I think, people have that within them, but we just have to inform them a little bit more. And as I said, I think the Millennium Development Goals have done a great job of galvanizing public opinion. Maybe some people, especially in my country, in the United States, may not have heard of the Millennium Development Goals, but if you say these are what the goals actually do, cutting poverty in half, getting girls in school, making sure that women don't die in childbirth, people say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I wouldn't want a villager, even if I don't know her name, to die in childbirth. That makes a lot of sense, especially since it doesn't cost that much to get it done.
And there are literally tens of thousands non-governmental organizations around the world that have signed on to support the Millennium Development Goals. And of course, it's critical that they play an active role along with their individual members. But it's interesting too that so many of the members, I know just my own personal experience, are not aware that the organizations are supporting the Millennium Development Goals. But if you're a member of just about any faith-based group, any place in the world, you're probably supporting the Millennium Development Goals. If you're a service club member, if you're in Rotary or Lions or Kiwanis, you're probably supporting the Millennium Development Goals. And you go across the board and come to find out that there are lots of organizations that have signed on officially to this, but a lot of the members still are not aware that this is out there. And of course, they can go to unfoundation.org to get more information, and they can go to Millennium Development Goals. Just Google it, and it will pull up a lot of information. So it's imperative to keep getting the word out, because these are common human values that we aspire to, we have that are internalized, and we do want to help people, not only in our own communities, our own countries, but around the world.
Yeah. In fact, one of the projects that the UN Foundation runs is called Nothing But Nets. And what we really try to do with that is to mobilize people around the world, and especially Americans, to provide funding for insecticide-treated bed nets, which in a village in Africa is one of the major causes of death in some of these villages. And, you contribute $10, you buy someone a bed net, and you can save somebody's life with that. And while we may not, within that context, understand that's one of the Millennium Development Goals, it's been very helpful with getting people to contribute to the cause.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'll be back in just a moment after this important message. Welcome back to our program. Today we're looking at the United Nations Foundation and the role the UN Foundation plays in helping to inform the media, the public, and policymakers in the United States and around the world about various United Nations programs. My guest today is an expert on the UN Foundation. My guest today is Ms. Minh-Thu Pham. Ms. Minh-Thu Pham is the Director of Public Policy at the UN Foundation and Better World Campaign. Minh-Thu, we're talking about the Millennium Development Goals, and you brought up Nothing But Nets, and this is a critically important program. Before we leave that, let me go back to that just for a moment. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, that if someone made like a $10 donation, that could save a child's life. You could have this net that's treated with creosote or whatever they use on it, and it lasts for 5 years or something. You can bring me up to date. But for under $10 to save a child's life. Is that correct, or somewhere in the ballpark?
That's right. $10, you buy a net. We contribute that money to the Global Fund, and they purchase bed nets, and we distribute them to places in Africa that have malaria. And we encourage families to use those. And when they cover their beds at night, which is when mosquitoes are very active, when the mosquito hits the bed net, the insecticide kills the mosquito, and so not only does it prevent the child or individual from being bitten by the mosquito, but also it kills the mosquito so that the mosquito can't then go on and bite somebody else. That's an incredibly powerful tool, and you think that it's so simple. It's just a bed net, but in Africa and in other parts of the world, it's very, very important that people use them so that they aren't bitten by mosquitoes and then die of malaria.
It really is a very important program. Now, some countries are doing well on the Millennium Development Goals, achieving the 8, and the goal is to do it by 2015. You have some countries that some will probably achieve all of them, some will achieve some of them, and it's at varying levels. But what will happen after 2015? It's been such an important program, it will just not die or expire or be taken out of existence at that time, will it?
No, we absolutely hope not. And actually, there's a lot of energy now around what do we do to keep the momentum of the Millennium Development Goals. They've done, as we've just talked about, they've done such a great job of mobilizing the world around a focused set of issues that can really help make a difference in people's lives. And we've already made quite a bit of progress, as you noted, and there's still a lot more to be done. And so there's the work of unfinished business that we know that even though countries have made tremendous progress in achieving them, there's still a lot more that needs to be done. Just because you have poverty doesn't mean that, we can call it a day. In fact, we need to deal with the rest of poverty, and especially those people who are in poverty that are on the margins of society, women's groups, minority groups, the disabled, and others. And so there's a lot that still has to be done. And then there are sort of new and emerging issues, things that in 2000 we may not have really carefully considered. For instance, the pockets of poverty or the large pockets of poverty in urban areas of middle-income countries, or the fact that there are some countries that are in conflict and have often relapsed into conflict. And the Millennium Development Goals, it's been very difficult to achieve them there because of the violence in those societies. So how do we sort of address these sets of issues? There's also the issue of climate change and environmental sustainability. And so, even if you dealt with poverty, if there's a drought or a famine as a result of an environmental issue, then those people will fall back into poverty. So how do you make these sustainable, and that you really do have to think about the environmental issues? And so after the Millennium Development Goals expire, we still have a lot of work, and we know that that tool of goals really helped to to focus people on a set of issues. And so using that same idea, can we then bring attention to some of the issues that some of the problems we didn't finish addressing, but also these new and emerging issues as well. And so absolutely, we won't be done in 2015, but I think all of the energy around what the new set of goals should look like, or what we need to do to continue the MDGs, that is because the MDGs were seen as being so effective. And so a lot of groups are saying, now I want in, my issue should also be a part of this agenda. How do we use this framework to continue making people's lives better? And so we hope that the next set of goals will be a worthy sequel, if you will, to the Millennium Development Goals that we now have.
What role do you think the media, I know you're doing a lot with the UN Foundation and many other groups too, have the Millennium Development Goals and the links on their websites. What role do you feel that the media, generally speaking, across the U.S. and really in every country of the world, can do to help provide more information to people so that they better understand these goals and to realize how they're affected and how they can affect people in other parts of the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some policy leaders, those of us who work in this field, we kind of look at things on a global level, what countries are achieving goals, which ones are not, what should we be doing, how much money is involved. But actually, to your general public, what makes a difference are those personal stories, the perspective that you have with understanding what a family is going through in a village. And I think the media can really highlight those things. So when you see a story about a girl who isn't able to go to school, and then how that then impacts her life and prevents her from being able to start a family in the way that she wants to, or go to school, or be able to participate in political life and all of those kinds of things, it really does, I think, impact the thinking of your average citizen. And I think those are the ways that I think media can really help to enlighten people. It's harder when you look at things in the abstract. But I think the media has a very important role to play in raising the profile of these issues. As I said before, I don't think that people don't care about them. I think you just have to capture their imagination, because we do have so much information out there. There's sort of a information overload, but as soon as you kind of have a good story that captures people's attention, people do step up to the plate. and they do want to do something about it.
Now, there are 8 Millennium Development Goals, and Millennium Development Goals 4 and 5 are to reduce infant mortality rates by 2/3 by 2015, also to reduce maternal death rates by an appropriate amount by 2015. These are two areas that we know what to do. We see that Millennium Development Goal number 1, reducing poverty, we're moving forward. We've actually achieved it to a large degree.
Yeah.
But Millennium Development Goals number 4 and 5 were, deals with young children or babies and with mothers, expecting mothers or mothers who've just had babies, that this is an area that we know how to deal with. It's provide the proper assistance, but what is going wrong here? Why can we not get this under control? I know Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has focused attention on this. Many other groups have focused attention on this.
Yeah.
And why can we not get this going? Because we can achieve it.
Yeah, great question. You know, it's a little bit tougher than, say, the malaria problem, which I just mentioned, because with malaria, I think there's only a few interventions, and everyone agrees that children shouldn't die of malaria. With maternal health, it's a little bit harder because there are sometimes cultural issues involved, and you know, you need the right health systems. It's not just one thing like a bed net that will really help save someone's life, but you need health infrastructures, you need hospitals, you need ways for women to get to the hospitals. You know, some of these places don't have adequate roads, and if people are traveling miles and miles, you know, by the time they get to a place where they can actually get the right treatment, it may be a little bit too late. So there's a lot of other things that have to happen and have to be put into place to help achieve that goal. And that's why I think that one's a little bit more difficult. And as I said, there's also cultural issues and gender equality issues involved as well. And so in some parts of the world, we're not doing as well, and there are other things that we need to do to address that, and that it may not be as straightforward as, say, malaria.
Now, you mentioned gender issues, which brought to mind Millennium Development Goal number 3, to empower women. And of course, you have one of the programs the foundation has is a Girl Up program. A little bit of, just give us a little bit of an overview of that program. What is it, and how does it tie into empowering women?
Yeah. Well, you know, the lives of adolescent girls have often been overlooked, but we know the research shows that if you can help a girl in her adolescence, you can help put her on the path to a brighter future. If, for instance, as an adolescent girl, she doesn't get the right education, which may lead to her not being able to get an adequate job, or being informed enough about her choices with starting a family and being able to feed her family and onward. It's a point in a girl's life that makes a tremendous difference in whether she has a brighter future or whether she does not. And so the Girl Up program really tries to empower girls and make sure that they know that they're important, and that there are opportunities out there for them, and that we need to help provide those. And it also links girls here in the United States to their counterparts in other parts of the world to help empower one another. And we think that's a very important message.
It certainly is. And of course, our viewers can go to unfoundation.org
Yes.
and get more information on this, as well as the rest of the programs that you're operating.
Yes.
Now, we talk about the general public, and the non-governmental organizations and the citizens at large in every country are so critical, because, as you mentioned, governments cannot overcome these problems by themselves. The UN can't do it by themselves. No one group can do it by itself. So the important thing is to involve people. But so often we find, especially in the United States, since we're here, we'll just talk about this for the moment, that the majority or a large number of people do not understand the United Nations. I'm talking about rank and file citizens. You did a poll. The UN Foundation does polls periodically. I think it was the Heart Research Center poll or one of those like that about 5-6 months ago. What did that poll reveal, and what are some of the implications of it?
Well, Bill, we actually do a poll every 6 months or so, as you say, pretty regularly to gauge American public opinion about the UN and UN issues. And what you'll find is that the vast majority of Americans, when asked, they do believe in the UN. They do. Usually we have about 60 to 70% favorability rating for the UN when people ask about it, and even higher when you ask Americans about the role of UN peacekeeping in keeping the world safer, especially when UN peacekeeping means that American troops don't then have to go to places in the world where the U.S. doesn't have a bigger role to play. And so, and it's just burden sharing. So most Americans in these polls we found do actually support the UN. There is some misunderstanding about the UN within the American public. Sometimes you hear about things that the UN's doing and it may not actually be true. And sometimes you hear about decisions that the member states of the UN make that actually are true, but that don't necessarily lend a lot of support to the kinds of things. So, for instance, action in Syria. It's just a devastating crisis right now in Syria, and it's been going on for far, far too long. Way too many people have died unnecessarily. And people say, well, why isn't the UN doing something about that? Isn't that what the UN is there to do? It was founded at the end of World War II. But, when countries in the Security Council can't agree with what they want to do about Syria, then you don't have an outcome.
Well, Minh-Thu Pham, these are all very important issues, and the UN Foundation is very involved in helping us to better understand them. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.